What I'm going to be doing today is giving you a demonstration on the very basics of centering, opening the clay, and a basic pull. First of all, what I want you to do is just get a piece of clay that is about the right size to fit comfortably into your hands, okay? And it shouldn't be any larger than that, or smaller. If you get it too small, it's too hard to center. If you get it too large, it's too hard to center. So get something that's just comfortable, block form, off the 25-pound bag of clay. Then take that, and for right now, because I'm not going to show you wedging at this time, just smack it into a ball. Get this clay into a ball shape and put it as close to center as you can on the wheel. If the wheel is wet, the clay is going to slide off. So make sure that your wheel head is not wet. Make sure that it's dry. As you can tell, the clay is sticking. If the wheel is wet, this is a typical problem that'll happen. If the wheel is wet, your clay then will slide. And the reason that it'll slide is because we use water in ceramics to reduce friction. Okay, so if you have water on your wheel, make sure that you clean it off. Okay, so get the water off the wheel head, and always use a sponge. Okay, don't go over to the sink and get paper towels. Whenever you use the potter's wheel, always think of it in terms of a tool. So if you're going to do anything on the wheel, get the wheel moving. Don't sit here and start drying or scraping clay off while the wheel is in a very stationary position. Now you take the clay, you put it as close to center as possible, squeeze it on the wheel head like this, push down, squeeze it back and forth. Now just take your finger and run it around the clay. Because when I go to put water on the clay, if I don't seal the bottom, what's going to happen is that the water is going to crawl under the clay. It's called capillary action, and the clay then will slide right off the wheel head. When you come to the wheel, my suggestion is to come with only the basic tools that you need. One is a cutting wire. That's to get the pot off the wheel. The other is an ice pick or a bug pick. Either one is okay to cut off the uneven top. A potter's rib, okay, and a sponge. Okay, now the way that I'm going to teach you to center is for you to use your body weight, not just your hands, because when you use just your hands, you only have so much strength, and you can like squeeze in this way and you only have so much strength. So what I'm going to teach you how to do is how to use your body when you throw. Okay, when I went to school, I threw with a bunch of guys, and they could like just muscle the clay right in, and I had to find other ways to do it, and one way that I figured out was to use your body weight. So just take your chair and move it slightly to the right, and don't sit directly square in the middle of the wheel because it makes it uncomfortable. Think of the foot pedal as if it were an accelerator on a car. Always keep your foot on it. Try not to take your foot off of it, because if you come to a curve, you might have to slow down. Now, what you want to do is get your hands wet. And one thing that I don't want you doing is rubbing your hands together, because after you've had your hands on the clay, you'll start to make a slurry. And slurry is clay, and clay breaks clay down. So always try to keep the water clear. Also use cold water, because cold water will not break the clay body down as fast as a hot water will. Now when you're going to go to center, the idea is to get the clay as close to or in the center of the wheel. That's it. You have to get it in the center of the wheel. As you can tell right now, it is off center. If I take my hands and just put it on here, you can see that my hands will just move around. Notice that my hands are moving around, and also notice the elbows. Okay, everything's moving. When you approach the clay, anytime you go for the clay, you have to go for the clay with very, very stiff, firm, rigid hands. Okay, get your right elbow and stick it into your hip or into your leg, whichever is comfortable, and use your legs when you throw, not just your arms. If I take my hand and push my leg in like this, you can see that I'm almost on center. Now what I have to do is give it pressure. And because I approach the clay with very, very stiff hands, I'm going to take the clay from here, and I'm going to push it in this direction with this hand, and in this direction with this hand, and that will immediately center the clay up. So it's just squeeze, and notice that the clay comes up. Now, with my left hand and using this part of my hand, what I'm going to do is to set the clay in here like this. And I'm not going to push directly down because then the clay will go off center, as you can see. So what we want to do is get the clay up, and we're going to come down on it, but on an angle. Notice that I'm going to push it off. And this hand is going to be pushing in this direction. And the clay will center. Now, notice that I'm using all of my fingers, all of my hand, palm of my hand, and my fingers. I'm never sitting here with my fingers out. I don't have my thumbs up, but everything is in. One thing about centering and clay, working with clay in general on the wheel, is think of it in terms of being a very, very intimate relationship. Everything is in. Notice my shoulders are in, my elbows are in, my fingers are in, my hands are in. Everything is in. And your fingers have an amazing amount of strength, so make sure that you use them. Because if you use just the palms of your hand, you don't have the control. You want to completely surround this thing, this mound of clay. Now, when you give pressure to the clay, what we're going to do here is use water. Now, water is used to reduce friction, as I've mentioned before. So what you want to do is give the clay pressure. Let's knock this clay off center. We're going to give the clay pressure, pushing this hand in this direction and the left hand in this direction. When I give it pressure, I let it slip through the wet. Okay, I let it slip through. You always think of water as something that reduces the friction. So I'm going to push, and I'm going to give pressure, but I'm going to let it slide through that pressure, and that's very, very important. Squeeze. Notice that it's slipping through my wet hands. Now I'm going to take this clay, push down with this hand and in with this hand. And even though, like right now, I'm applying an incredible amount of pressure, when I come off the clay, I relax. It's very, very important to relax. If you give the clay pressure, and you'll notice I'm giving it a lot of pressure, I'm actually pushing it off to the side. If I don't relax when I come off the clay, it's going to go off center. Okay, so when you approach the clay with stiff hands, forcing it in this direction like this. When you come off the clay, you back off gently. So you approach the clay and you let it come up. You squeeze it and you let it come up. Notice that I'm using all of my fingers and my thumbs. Now when I push the clay down, again, it's pushing it on a slight angle using this part of my hand. This part of my hand is very important. Pushing it like this and pushing in with my right hand. As I push down with my left hand, I never push down any harder than the right hand is capable of pushing it back on and keeping it in center. So let's do this again. Let's knock it off center. Again, with a great amount of determination. Okay, you've got to be stubborn about this. You can't just approach it in a lackadaisical manner. You've got to be determined and go for it. It's this, and let it slip through the wet. And squeeze the fingers and squeeze the thumb. Okay? Now, push the clay down and notice that it's going on an angle. Push in with the right hand, and when you come off the clay, relax. Very, very important to relax. If your hands start to get hot, if they get this kind of hot sensation, or the bottom of your hands start to burn, you're doing a couple of things wrong. First of all, if your hands get hot, you're not using enough water. Water is very, very important. So make sure that you keep your hands wet. If the bottom of your hand is burning, then you're pushing down rather than in. And one thing that you can do as a precaution here is to keep this wheel head clean. So now you're going to use the potter's rib. And notice that when I use the rib, I put flat side down and flat side towards the clay. And I remove clay off the wheel head. Okay, now the wheel head is clean. You can take a sponge too if you want and get the sand off the surface. And that'll keep your hands from getting raw. So let's do this again. Knock it off center and push like this. And centering should be as natural to you as walking. Now I relax. Notice when I approach the clay, squeeze with a great amount of determination, using fingers, thumbs, everything that you've got. Always use everything that you've got. Push down with the left hand using this part of your hand. Remember to do this. And as I push, notice that this clay is going on an angle, that I'm not just coming down on it like this because it will go off center, but pushing it over and cupping my thumb over the top